across the country, I want to turn to the protests that are happening as demonstrators envision a reality without federal protections for abortion rights. Now, there are planned rallies by pro-abortion rights protesters in New York, in Chicago, in LA, and here in Washington, D.C., and they've drawn large crowds. And we're also going to get a perspective from anti-abortion rights activists. They are not protesting today, but they do have a strategy. You know, this weekend's demonstrations, they are happening just days after a Senate vote failed. And this is a vote that would have enshrined Roe v. Wade into federal law. Now, many of us knew that vote was going to fail. So the question is, what is next? Well, we're going to go to the people on the ground to tell us just that. Antonia Hilton is at a pro-abortion rally in Washington, D.C., and Ellison Barber has been talking to anti-abortion activists in Georgia. Thank you both for being here. Antonia, I want to start with you. I want to know what you're hearing from folks today. I've been watching you throughout the early afternoon. What are you hearing from people?
Hey, Simone. It has been a really emotional day. Thousands of people were first on the National Mall and have been moving here toward the steps of the Supreme Court. Many of the women that I've spoken to, particularly young women, have been outraged, really angry. I mean, shaking when I talk to them. And, you know, they describe knowing that with a conservative majority in the Supreme Court that this was a possibility, but still being shocked by the leaked opinion coming out. I think many of them felt they weren't really prepared for that moment. On the flip side, it's re-engaged some of them politically. They say they're more than ever prepared to go out and vote, that they're talking to their friends about the midterms right now. And then when I talk to older women, women who have daughters and granddaughters, it's a lot of sadness, a lot of fear. They remember a pre-Roe world, so they talk a lot about that. I spoke with one woman who told me about an abortion that she had in a back alley in Chicago when she was 13 years old. It was just a really raw conversation. So it gives you a sense, while you can hear cheering and you can look at times like people are celebrating, of course, and walking together, there's a lot of sadness and anger here. Take a listen to some of the conversations I had with young women here and young voters.
If I can't protect myself, who's going to protect me? I've lost faith in the system. I've lost faith in our representatives. I know that there are some out there that are actually going out and they are looking out for us and they want us to have these rights and they want us to progress, but it's all a political game.
You know, Simone, none of the protesters who are here today have said to me that they expect that what they're doing right now is going to change the minds of conservative justices who have signaled they've been moving toward this point for a long time, right? But they want to send a message to lawmakers at the federal level, to lawmakers in the various states that they're from back home, that they're expecting them to take action to codify, to protect women's reproductive rights. And this is a message that they see those folks as really their last hope at this point. And so while they know that this might not change the outcome at the Supreme Court, they're hoping that this isn't the end of their fight, Simone.
Antonia, thank you very much. So lots of energy we see out there for folks hoping to protect abortion rights in this country. Ellison, I want to come to you because the Georgia primary is set for Tuesday, May 24th. Early voting has already started in Georgia. And if Roe v. Wade is overturned, a 6-week abortion ban in Georgia is very likely to take effect. And for folks watching, that is before most women even know that they're pregnant. Now, you spoke to an anti-abortion activist in Georgia. What did she say?
Yeah, I mean, this is a state where this is a huge issue, something that people on both sides of this debate are paying close attention to. Anti-abortion activists have spent decades trying to overturn Roe v. Wade, but when that leaked draft opinion came out, they weren't celebrating in the streets. Why? Well, one activist I talked to, she said that they didn't want to count their chickens before they hatch. They are happy about this moment. They are pleased to see what is likely to be Roe v. Wade overturned within the next 2 months. But they are taking a more focused, incremental approach and waiting to see the final draft. A focused, incremental approach. That's what they have been doing for years. Listen to what some of my conversation was with the executive director of an influential anti-abortionist group here in Georgia.
I think that if 50 years from now we're looking back on this moment and it's what we think it's going to be, then it was because the pro-life movement a number of years ago decided they were going to start going to state legislatures and they were going to get pro-life people elected, and that eventually one of these laws they were going to pass was going to go up and overturn Roe. We are a positive movement. We're happy warriors. We're the people that are, I believe, on the right side of this issue.
There's a long ways for us to go. Roe v. Wade being overturned is not going to end abortion in America, but it will give us the groundwork for us to move forward and state by state to get the job done.
If Roe v. Wade is overturned, abortion bans are expected to go into effect in 23 states. That's according to an analysis by NBC News looking at data from the Center for Reproductive Rights. 13 of those states already have trigger laws on the books. If you're someone who supports abortion rights, it's important to understand the history of how the anti-abortion movement got to this point, particularly when you look at polls and you see that the majority of Americans do not support overturning Roe v. Wade, even if they support some abortion restrictions. They got to this point by, in the mid-'80s, aligning with the Republican Party and then hyper-focusing on getting people elected into office who they thought would appoint, if given the chance, pro-life conservative justices, and then also focusing on state and local laws and changing them. In terms of, is this over, the fight for anti-abortion activists when Roe v. Wade is overturned, the answer is no. They plan to use the same tactics and strategies that they've used to get to this point, to get to the ultimate goal, which is banning abortions in all 50 states. Simone?
NBC's Ellison Barber in Gainesville, Georgia, thank you. And Antonia, thank you in D.C. Okay, so my panel is here, and we're going to get into all of this. We've got MSNBC political analyst Juanita Tolliver, political White House reporter and Playbook co-author Eugene Daniels, and former Republican Congressman David Jolly. All right. Now, Eugene, I am going to go ahead and I'm going to start with you. Now, I said it in the opening. I'm going to say it again. We knew this vote was going to fail this week. And the White House knew the vote was going to fail this week, frankly. Vice President Harris went up to the Hill to preside over the vote. She does that when it's important to note that these things are important to the White House. What is the White House's plan now going forward? What are you hearing?
Yeah, exactly. They know in the White House, in the administration writ large, that there's kind of little they can do that will fundamentally alter a world that is post-Roe, right? If that is to actually happen in the coming weeks. And so first, what they're trying to do is sustain the anger that you saw during Antonia's live hit, right? Talking to people about making sure that in the midterms that they get more senators, for example, that are going to be in Congress so that they can actually figure something out, because there aren't enough votes, there aren't 60 votes to pass anything, whether Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski figure out a bill that they would support. That is not going to get them 60 votes. But the administration is also looking at ways to kind of nibble around the edges, discussing whether funding for through Medicaid or some other mechanism can give people money and funds to travel to other states for abortions, right? And so they're talking about all of the things that they can do, but they know that all of the executive actions that this administration could do, regulatory actions that this administration can do, are also possibly going to end up in court, right? That's something that Republicans have already said they're going to start doing. So there's not much they can do here, but hope that folks turn out in midterms and give them more people, because this is something that, as was just said, Republicans have been working on for decades. And so you can't, fighting that within a few weeks is not really possible.
Well, that's a fact. Okay, I want to play, and Eugene talked about this, I want to play Senator Joe Manchin earlier this week, specifically talking about the Democrats' bill. Take a listen to this.
70% of the American public wants Roe v. Wade to be codified, as has been precedented law for 50 years. To me, that would be the reasonable, rational thing to do. The bill we have today to vote on, the Women's Health Protection Act, and I respect people who support, but don't make no mistake, it is not Roe v. Wade codification. It's an expansion. It wipes 500 state laws off the books. It expands abortion.
Now, Juanita, I don't necessarily agree with Senator Manchin's analysis here, but this isn't about me today. I do want to note, though, that Republicans, they're working on a more narrow bill to codify Roe, and there is no apparent consensus. I mean, we don't know when we're going to see that bill. I am interested in your thoughts on like a national strategy for Democrats. I don't necessarily believe that a national cohesive strategy exists right now. And to Eugene's point, Republican strategists and lawmakers have been working towards this very place for years, and you just can't out-organize that in a few weeks. So your thoughts?
You can't out-organize decades of attempting to oppress women and people with a uterus in a matter of weeks, but you can fight. And one of the things that one of the women that Antonio spoke to said that she's looking at Democrats in Congress who are trying to do the right thing as her last hope. So they need to show up, because I promise you, Simone, once these voters are educated at the grassroots level and organized and mobilized, they're going to want to know how Democrats are fighting for them. So nibbling around the edges, as Eugene mentioned, if that's the play, make it the play to show voters that you are fighting for them in real time. Remember, Republicans were dogged every single time they wanted to not only attack Roe and a woman's right, but also health care. Remember how they took vote after vote working to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Democrats need to match that energy in their fight for people, even if it fails, or even if their regulatory changes are challenged in court. What matters to voters is that they see Democrats fighting, because telling people show up at the polls and maybe we'll try again next time ain't gonna cut it. Telling people, hey, come on, turn out for us, and then we will try again next Congress is not going to be sufficient. People want to see evidence right now, and I think that's clear based on what we heard from the protesters today and activists who spoke today. They made it clear today's action was a first step, and that action is going to be translated into their groups in states across the country to, again, educate voters, organize, and mobilize. And I appreciate that that call to action was reiterated repeatedly at today's protest.
All right. Well, Anita has matched that same energy. You know, Congressman Jolly, I saw your smirk, because you were not only a former congressman, you were also a political consultant in a former life, a lawyer. You can live a lot of lives. So I'm wondering your thoughts. You know, that's the view from where my Democratic friends sit. I'm wondering your thoughts, though, because we know that there are a lot of my Republican friends who are not comfortable with where the conversation currently is. I'm talking about jailing women, fining women and abortion providers, potentially jailing doctors. There are trigger laws on the books right now. What about those folks, right, who are uncomfortable, but not so uncomfortable that they are necessarily willing to, if you're a Republican in Congress, vote with your Democratic colleagues on this bill last week, or if you are a Republican in the state legislature who is willing to block legislation. So what about those people? How are they navigating this?
Well, listen, I think they are representative of much of the country that feels unrepresented in this. And what I would beg my Democratic friends to consider is you have a once-in-a-generation opportunity politically, truly, to bring in a persuadable constituency. You know, rarely in politics do you have a persuadable constituency. The last 20 years have followed turnout models, and we're going to see that as a result of Roe being overturned. We're going to see the turnout of the passionate pro-choice and passionate pro-life community. But there is a large swath of Americans who have probably never before called themselves pro-choice, but do actually support Roe. Roe and Casey set a balancing test that represents where, as Manchin said, 70% of the country is. And so, look, I think that's an opportunity for either party. The Republicans are not going to figure it out. Democrats can. And I would suggest this is a very persuadable constituency that could change the entire dynamic of the November election if Democrats get this one right.
I agree with you, sir. It remains to be seen if they're going to get it right. Juanita Tolliver, Eugene Daniels, David Jolly.